welcome to the September 2025 edition of Trustmasters Monthly. So hard to actually say September and think that we're actually here. Feels like 2025 just started. Nonetheless, we're at the end of Q3, headed into Q4. And Shay, the topics that we hope to talk about today, I think are going to be particularly meaningful for organizations as they think about not just their strategy in 2026 and beyond, but also how to budget for that strategy. So I feel like this time is very, very appropriate for the dialogue, the content we hope to share. Really quickly, to do some basic housekeeping, we will be monitoring the Q&A section of the tool throughout today's webinar. So if you have questions, please drop them in. If we don't have time to answer all your questions, address all your questions, we will follow up after the fact, but rest assured you will get your question answered, if not live today, with a follow-up sometime after today. Also, immediately following the session, please hang on for just a few moments. We do have a survey that we ask participants to complete, really just as a mechanism for us to collect feedback about how we can get better and bring more value to the community through these monthly sessions that we hold. So please take a few moments to fill out the survey for us. We really, really appreciate your feedback. That said, again, welcome to Trustmasters Monthly. Today, I have joining us a very, very special guest, Dr. Shay Brown, CEO, founder of BABL AI. Shay, for those that maybe don't have benefit of knowing you and your background, would you care to do just a really brief introduction to set the stage?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. As Patrick said, I'm the founded CEO of BABL AI. BABL AI is an AI audit and assurance firm, and so we do a lot of assurance engagements around high risk, typically AI systems, either for compliance. So you can think of like sort of safety critical or rights critical systems. We also provide training. So we have a training for auditors, both internal auditors, external auditors, and AI governance professionals. That was like by accident that we have that. And we have also sort of an advisory service, which involves a lot of sort of technical testing. So we're deeply kind of technical organization. So we think about how we assess and monitor these systems. And super excited to be here. And in former life, I was a professor of astrophysics, but as of a couple of years ago, I'm now retired.
Shay, thank you. And I will say, in your presentations, it very much feels like a lecture. So I try to take notes so that I can be sure that I'm actually learning as we work together. That said, for our participants, for those watching, those listening, today we do hope to cover a lot of ground. So our objectives for today are to discuss how to evaluate risks your organization faces in relation to implementation, either development or use of AI, ways in which you can generate buy-in in the organization to not only support creating budget, but also ongoing support of the resources and initiatives that organizations need to actually employ AI in a responsible and effective way. We'll talk about putting together the right teams. And by teams, I mean the partners that you'll need to be successful, not only in standing up and building your AI management system or your governance framework, but also operationalizing it and then providing independent third-party evaluation of that framework once it's been implemented, once it's been operationalized in your organization. We'll talk about ways that you can educate yourself and your team about the various AI frameworks, more specifically AI governance frameworks. We'll see there are several types of frameworks, several types of lenses through which we can view ways to behave responsibly with AI from security perspective, privacy perspective. Today, we're going to talk about through the governance lens. And then lastly, how you can customize your organization's defined way of thinking about AI through the development of your AI policy. So a lot of ground to cover. In reality, we might not get to every topic today, but should you have a question related to any of these things, again, please feel free to ask, and we'll do the best that we can to address it either live or after the fact. That said, really, when we think about beginning the governance process, the AI governance process, as with most other things related to governance or value creation, most of the conversations start with risk. And with AI in particular, to really understand the risk that you and your organization face through the use of these tools, really one of the first places that we need to start our thinking or real investigation is with our use cases. But we need to really understand how we intend to or are using AI systems through our organization. And from there, begin developing policies that enable and support the business cases that we've already identified for the use of AI. We talk to some customers that have an understanding that maybe they want to implement AI, but they don't necessarily know how or why or to what benefit. And Shay, I think I saw on a webinar that you delivered at some point, and I'll probably misquote you, so I apologize, but effectively the statement was the first question you should answer when determining whether or not you should use AI is, why do I need to use AI? I mean, I think that's a question that organizations really need to spend time dwelling on to ensure that AI is the right fit for them so that they can then govern those systems responsibly.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the biggest problem when the question you shouldn't be asking is, what AI system should I be using for this problem, right? The first question, of course, is what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then is AI the right fit for that problem? And I think that's a step that gets missed. Understandably, people are feeling like they're going to fall behind. They're hearing all these stories about these huge gains and efficiencies. And I think the fact of the matter is a lot of those efforts fail because that question is not asked. And this is, I think, relevant for us here because that is the prerequisite for understanding how you're going to assess risk. Because if you don't know what you have to gain, you don't know what kind of value you're trying to create, then you're not gonna be able to identify things that will give rise to risk to not creating that value. And so you got to be super clear about why you want to do it.
And then, Shape, to that end, that there are um, categories of risk that we know inherently are introduced with the introduction of AI, risks related to security, to privacy. Maybe if you could talk for just a moment about some of the risks that you've become familiar with, ways in which you've seen organizations perhaps overextend themselves in negative ways.
Yeah. So I mean, broadly speaking, we all know what the general business risks are, and none of those change. So you have obviously compliance risk, which we'll talk about later. You've got sort of operational risks that can happen. You've got some liability, safety, reputational. There's lots of categories here. Um, and the what AI does is it's going to introduce some new vectors towards those same risks, right? And so, what makes AI different? Well, it's something that can potentially take action on your behalf. There's some agency there, in some cases, right?
Mhm.
Uh, in other cases, it's doing things with a lack of transparency, so you don't know. So it's taking action, and there's a lack of transparency. There's an increase in speed, and there's an increase in scale. So something goes wrong, it can happen very, very quickly, and it can happen very over a broad scale for a lot of your clients. So a chatbot, for instance, that's like a customer-facing chatbot, right? Obviously, you have risks of an individual risk of an individual customer service agent talking to one of your clients, of offending them, giving them wrong information, making them upset, not being careful with their data, that sort of thing. Well, if you have a single AI system that does that and something goes wrong, it scales, it happens very rapidly. And so the categories of risk are all related to that. And then if you drill down further, there are features of the AI system and the socio-technical system that sort of give rise to those risks, which are kind of known. So bias is not in and of itself like a harm of any kind per se, but it could give rise to liability risk because you might get sued because it turns out that you're discriminating, right? So bias could give rise to discrimination, could give rise to liability risk or reputational risk or compliance risk. Um, those are just sort of a flavor, and I'll let you. I know Patrick, you're very steeped in this, so feel free to fill in where I've left behind. But it those are the basic elements.
Yes, I totally agree, Shay. One thing I will say, I think, at least in conversations I have with leaders, the common pushback to the risk of bias is, well, we're not making material decisions. I run a tool that evaluates indicators of compromise, or I run a tool that does simple transformations, whatever the case may be. And the reality is that bias is a significant risk, depending on use cases we talked about earlier. But even bigger is the use of AI without your awareness. IBM recently produced, I think they call it the data breach, cost of a data breach report, is what IBM's report is called. And for those that have seen this, it's stunning. Those that haven't, please check it out. It's very much worth the read. In it, they outline that the cost of breaches globally is right around 4.4 million. So identification, remediation, cleanup, the whole nine yards, right around 4.4 million. In the US, it's much higher. I think it was a little over 10 million for US based organizations. So very, very costly. But as they drilled in specifically to AI use cases, what they found was shadow AI in organizations was a predominant source for leakage of sensitive information. And so shadow AI, for those that don't know, is simply users in your organization that probably with no malintent, no misintent, are using tools to do their jobs. And through that process, your sensitive company information can be leaked out to the tools. And Shay, in those instances, while it can be harder to discern, it feels like it is just as big a risk. It is just as big an issue, just as big an area of concern for organizations because we are putting up potentially incredibly sensitive information into publicly available tools.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is something that is a privacy professional's nightmare.
Yeah.
Because you have access. It's so easy, and I think a lot of us have this. We see the power of being able to upload a document to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, and being able to interact with it, reason over it. It's a very useful thing, and I think that there's just a lack of understanding in the shadow AI case. So what shadow AI basically comes from a lack of leadership in the organization, where the leadership has not identified what an appropriate use or an acceptable use is of AI, how it gets access, what are the rules around accessing it. So even if you're an organization, let's say, that has not implemented some sort of enterprise version of these where you can kind of lock down and control, it doesn't mean you don't do anything. And it
Yes.
also doesn't mean you don't necessarily say don't ever use it. The easiest and most simple thing to do is say what are the circumstances under which you can use it, and then take the time to look up what are the risks. And so in one case is that ChatGPT, people would share their conversations with a colleague, and it wasn't obvious, even maybe to OpenAI, it wasn't obvious that when they shared that, it created a public link which got indexed by Google. And so people were thinking they were sharing some private conversation that they had with the AI that was presumably very useful, potentially with sensitive data. They'd share it with their colleagues to their institutional email address. That was
Mhm.
indexed by Google and was found later. And so just thinking ahead of time about having that right kind of acceptable use policy is sort of like, if you don't have one right now, go run away and do it, and then come back to the webinar, because that's priority number one.
Pause right now. Go create a policy. But
Yeah,
Shane,
we'll
more
wait.
more practically and more specific to your point, keeping it in vein of Google, earlier this week you talked about a vulnerability that's been identified in OpenAI with their recent enabling of model context protocol, MCP, wherein users could potentially unwittingly give the AI, in this case, OpenAI, full access to all system information that they have access to.
Yeah, even access to your calendar, to documents, because this is the danger with agents. So model context protocol is around agents. So the idea is that you want to use a large language model of some type to do actions on your behalf, look at your documents, draft an email for you, look at your calendar and find a time. And the problem is it's not well understood what the security implications of that are. And so it turns out, for instance, that if you allow the agent to even have access to your calendar, that it also starts getting pulling in context from sort of derivatives from the calendar, like things that get attached to it and stuff like that. There's a lot of risk there that we don't understand, and so this is something that you can't sleep on, and if you have a really sensitive use case where or sensitive data that you have to keep private, moving very slowly is going to be much better than moving fast, because there are tons of backdoors through these systems, and in order to get the benefit, you have the tendency to want to open those doors to let the system interact with other data, but we don't yet know exactly what the implications are, and we keep finding out every day, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it really is amazing. Again, we've made it to this portion of the conversation only to recognize that while bias is a risk, to Shay's point, there are many other real risks that organizations are experiencing today, technical risks, administrative risks, you name it. The risks are very, very real and are completely and totally dependent on your use cases, so, which again is why beginning the governance journey is so critical. And beginning the governance journey with what's in front of you, it is absolutely necessary. Now, Shay, to that end, I think we both have a lot of conversations with organizations that maybe don't even know where to start. We've laid out this path of start with your use cases, think about risk, think about ways in which we can begin controlling those risks. But in reality, what most people know, most executives know, is that none of this really matters if we don't have the appropriate coming from the top, if we don't have appropriate buy-in from the leaders that need to buy in and commit to support of AI governance. We know that these governance initiatives become nothing more than projects that very likely fail and don't carry on through operationalization. So, Shay, have you seen positive ways, supportive ways of engaging leadership to actually generate the buy-in that's needed to be successful in standing up a new AI governance program?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is not that many, to be honest. Like, I think so. So fear is a wonderful motivator, and I think what you're seeing is a lot of the activity right now and the spending that is happening at at the management level. A lot of budgets getting allocated because of fear. So the fear is we're falling behind. Everybody else is using AI, and we are going to lose this race, whatever race we're in our industry, if we don't apply, put spend on that. And I think this is just me talking to leadership. What I emphasize is that fear should also motivate spending on AI governance, because the fact is that a lot of these things are going to fail. You're not going to get the full value of that spend if you don't apply governance alongside it. And I think the misconception is that, we'll worry about it later. And so let's just get the benefits. Let's get the ROI now with efficiencies or whatever, and we'll get the benefit later. And I think what all of the research is now showing is that the people just aren't getting benefit, period. And so, the differentiator here is let's let's build something that's going to last a little bit longer and actually can have ROI. Because I think governance is the thing that is going to be the differentiator between a project that wins and a project that fails. And so in my mind, it should be the fear of missing out is the same fear that's getting them to spend on AI in the first place should motivate them to make sure they've sort of got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted.
Shay, I totally agree. And I'm sorry to say this again. I know you've heard me say it probably too many times at this point, but ISACA defines governance as a value creation process wherein we seek to recognize desired outcomes at an optimized risk and cost. And so, risk, cost, desired outcomes, what it is we really want to create, are all part of the value creation formula. And to your point, what we see many organizations doing is investing, spending cost on tools without a clear definition of a clear articulation, that is, of what they really hope to create, and therefore no real concept of the risk that's inherent in what it is that they're doing. Highly, highly problematic. And so, for those that are budgeting, those that are responsible for signing the checks for these tools, please protect yourselves. Please ensure that governance is actually implemented alongside whatever tool you're bringing in so that you can recognize those desired outcomes. If you don't know what they are, even more reason to implement a governance program so that you can define them cleanly and understand what risk you're really willing to take on as part of this value creation process. It's absolutely critical. Now, that said, Shay, we're kind of saying this not necessarily a proliferation, but we are seeing more and more frameworks come online intended to help organizations think about governing AI in a responsible way. Most people that have listened to me talk are familiar with ISO 42001. Many people are familiar with the NIST AI risk management framework, which isn't necessarily explicitly a governance framework, but does have governance mechanisms. We have the EU AI Act as a pressing regulation that we expect to have a complementary QMS standard to help organizations build out something to really govern AI. Are there other tools, Shay, other frameworks that you're familiar with that our listeners should know? Or are there specific benefits of the frameworks that I've mentioned that you think are particularly important for our listeners to know?
Yeah. So, I mean, to answer the first question, there aren't that many like there are other individual laws, things like the Colorado, quote unquote AI Act.
Mhm.
Um, there are, different countries have put out different frameworks, but they all have a similar kind of flavor. And I think, uh, in particular, if you look at the ones you mentioned, these are kind of the core. I see these as the core three: 42,001, NIST AI Risk Management Framework, and the EU AI Act's sort of conception of management systems there. And I think uh, you can't go wrong with any of them, but you can, waste time with some, right? And so I think like if you were to implement any one of those to the full extent, you're going to get a lot of value from that. But it's much, I would say it's important to take a step back and start with like, what is your, defining the context of your organization, like to the point of 42,001 has this, clause 4 for that reason to figure out where are we actually exposed here and then start moving forward with a particular framework. And in my personal opinion, I think 42,001, which maybe doesn't surprise people, but that one makes the most sense because it it is something that is familiar to most people internationally. It is something that can be audited against, and so you can provide some assurance, some certification around it, and it has the flexibility to add in other things. So uh, and have those things audited. So if you are in the EU, you can put in the EU Act requirements. It will bulk up what you need to do, but you can put it in there. Same thing with NIST. NIST has some wonderful controls that are not present in any of the other frameworks that are very specific for things like generative AI or security
Mhm.
or testing and evaluation. Pull those in, and I think but the core should start with what is the context of how we're developing or deploying the AI, and what does that sort of oblige us to uh, in terms of compliance and also, of course, the value creation.
And just to follow up on, say, one thing that you said with the AI Act, for those that aren't familiar with ISO management systems, you'll recall that the entire point of an ISO management system is to, first of all, be custom tailored to you and your specific context. I say you, I mean your organization. So every management system should be unique. That's the entire point. The second thing that's typical of all management systems is that we do have the ability to extend them as those unique pressures on us change. As an example, a unique pressure might be a customer contractual agreement. You might need to have certain controls in place for incident response. You name it. Those controls can actually be written into the statement of applicability for your management system and be validated as part of your annual either certification or surveillance audits of that management system. No different for the EUAI Act. One thing that does have to be said, however, is that there is no presumption of conformity for ISO 42001 since it's not a harmonized standard from the EU's perspective. So please just know that for those organizations that are looking to kill two birds with one stone, the two birds being earning a third party certification for market assurance, as well as ensuring that you've done what you need to do to be responsible and maintain conformity to the AI Act, please know that 42001 certification will not necessarily give you the presumption of conformity, but internally, you will absolutely have the mechanisms in place to ensure that when it is needed to produce evidence of conformity, that you have everything that you need to be successful. And so, really and truly, starting with your management system, say in this case, our governance framework, we have the ability to extend out based on our own unique, our own specific needs and risks, quite frankly. Say one of the things that I think is unique about ISO 42001 is that there is an expectation, again, based on our context, based on our use cases, that we develop AI specific impact assessment processes and AI risk assessment processes. And as you've worked with your customers, pardon me, have you seen that this has been a concept that's easy to pivot to? Or has this been a stumbling block for the organizations that you've been working with?
I mean, it's not easy to distinguish between the two, one thing. And the second one, which is the impact assessment, is not a typical thing that companies have done. So it's not something that is like inherent in the information security management system standards or the privacy. Like there are some sense in which data privacy impact assessment is familiar, right? And so,
Yes.
like if you're thinking about who in my organization might be able to help with implementing the impact assessment, probably your privacy professionals will be well aligned to understand how that can get deployed. But the fact is, the risk management requirements under ISO are pretty much focused on sort of the standard risks, business risks, or the internal risks associated with whatever your products and services are. And the impact assessment is much more outwardly focused. And the what doesn't make it easier is that in the EU AI Act, Article 9, which is the risk management system, is also outwardly focused and also much more focused on fundamental rights and the external parties involved. And there's also a separate impact assessment that deployers of AI systems have to do if they're in sort of public institutions under the AI Act, which is you could use ISO 42005, which is the impact assessment standard. You could use it for a lot of those. And so there's a ton of overlap, which makes it kind of confusing. But it doesn't mean that it's hard. It's just that people need to articulate. So,
Yes.
I'll give you my version of it, which is basically you are going to have business risk, which is going to be handled by your risk assessment, right? But that business risk necessarily is going to involve external stakeholders and their rights. because there are risks associated with someone suing you. There are risks associated with reputational damage if your chatbot is going to, say very horrible things to your customers, um, or, uh, or various, let's say, discrimination internally if you have an internal AI system that's used for hiring or promotion. There's all sorts of ways in which the business risks necessarily are going to result also from impacts on external stakeholders. But that's something that you can think about and work through and have a cadence for before you deploy the system. Impact assessments have this notion that you actually need to figure out what the real impacts are. There's a theoretical sense of that, of course, where you try to predict and you're going to measure things which are proxies for impact, but you also are deploying a system either internally to a company or externally. And the impact assessment is really meant to capture all of that. And so it's not a super clean, and I don't think it's really worth, it's not worth struggling over exactly what the demarcation is here. But uh, at a fundamental level, it's just one, you can sort of wrap around your regular business risks with slight extensions for fundamental rights and impacts to other people. And then the impact assessment is really focused on what are the actual impacts, how do we know that, and how are we tracking that over time. And but it is confusing, and again, it will take a while for companies to figure it out.
Yeah, another point of confusion. And since we're talking about confusing things, I'm just going to double down. So we'll talk about it now. But to this point, and you've said several times just in the past couple of minutes, business risk, business process. So to this point, through governance, what we've really been talking about are building frameworks to ensure that the business has appropriate checks and measures in place, appropriate processes in place to fundamentally do the right things. But the governance frameworks themselves don't necessarily have specifics built around, let's say, technical output testing of models. And so one of the things that we're saying come onto the market now or more specific tests geared toward ensuring that the outputs of models or systems are, in fact, what the organization claims that they will be. I don't know if you have an opinion here or more that you'd care to share about this new
Yeah,
type of testing.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you know, this is our business model basically, and I think that because what we provide is assurance over individual AI systems. And so the way we interact with this ecosystem is through the lens of typically some company, enterprise or other, is trying to procure or build an AI system to do a thing. And there are elements of the functioning of that AI system that are really critical to their risk posture. So it's like, is this thing a valid, like I'm going to replace a whole process. I'm going to have an intake of information for claims adjustment or something like that. There are going to be some fundamental things if they're trying to procure a system that does that, that it has to be validly taking information that's correct, accurate, is appropriate for the task, and uh, they have to have some assurance that that's actually working. So that assurance can come in lots of different ways, but no matter what, it's going to involve actually testing your system and showing the results. And in some cases, and where we often come in, and I'm sure A-LIGN is going to come in here too, is a lot of enterprises want assurance over those results because it's so risky for them they can't just take the word of the vendor on it.
Yes.
And so this is a very common thing. And we are seeing that it's becoming almost exponential in terms of uh, the demand for that. Because at the end of the day, you can say you have a management system, but if your actual AI system isn't functioning properly or governed in a very specific way through testing, validation, and monitoring, then that's not going to help the enterprise.
See, prime example of this, and I won't name names, but there is a well-known HR platform that has earned ISO 42001 certification, so validated their governance processes. This platform was written up as a case study on the NIST website for exactly how you should implement the NIST AI risk management framework. So, from a risk management perspective, from a governance perspective, this particular organization appears to have things buttoned up. What we found, however, through recent disclosures through a class action lawsuit, is that one particular system still exercised, Shay, was it age-related bias as it relates
I
to
mean,
high?
that's the accusation. Yeah, that
That's
it,
the
that
accusation. Yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
yeah. No, I mean, I think this, yeah, this is the exact problem is that you can have processes and management systems in place, but where the rubber meets the road is really where that AI system interacts with
Yeah.
customers, interacts with other stakeholders, your team internally. That's where the risk actually lies. And the whole point of the management system is to mitigate that risk. And I think what people sometimes fail to realize is how important that connection is, whether you're measuring and monitoring the right things to understand that risk. And that's where we get called in a lot. It's just a big problem. And I think we're going to see that the system level assurance is going to be table stakes in a lot of high risk use cases because otherwise you don't know what risk you're inheriting when you get a system or some other part of your organization says, hey, go use this AI system we just built. There's just a ton of risk associated there.
Totally agree. And Shay, you mentioned high risk, specifically in the context of the AI Act. High risk systems placed on the market require post market monitoring, which includes a whole slew of things. But one of those things appears to be satisfied by ongoing system level assurance. Did you share that opinion, or am I off base there?
No, I think, yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Um, Now there's you can get away with, of course, just doing it yourself, right? I think that's the
Absolutely.
attitude so far is that we'll just measure stuff and we'll share that with our clients or we'll share it with our internal team. And I think increasingly there's a recognition that that is not going to be good enough. Just like you have penetration tests to really figure out whether things have been done correctly, you're going to need to have other kinds of very direct procedures happening from external parties that are going to verify that the things that you claim your system is able to do and is able to withstand in terms of deviations in the operation actually hold up.
Yeah, and Shay, to your point, organizations can choose to walk this path alone, can choose to do all of this themselves, except for, of course, independent third party certification. That's a certification body's job. But they shouldn't. There's absolutely no need to. What we found, and she particularly working with you in Babel, is that there is significant value, significant power in building professional relationships through partnership. The partnership can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but ultimately we think of it as creating value via shared resources. Some of yours, some of ours, some of theirs. We all work together toward a common goal to really create value. Again, recognize desired outcomes that optimize risk and cost. And so there is a real need for organizations to consider their strategy, their plan, and how they could work with trusted partners to ensure that they're actually making progress toward those plans rather than just being stuck. Shay, you talked about fear earlier. We refer to it as FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which absolutely freezes organizations as they are trying to make progress on creating those outcomes that they so desperately desire.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, if speed is the thing that people want, right, which it appears that people want speed. And so they're rushing into AI. This that speed is going to be facilitated can only be kind of maximally facilitated by bringing in other people that understand things that you don't have the time or you don't necessarily need to know at a particular point in time. And so that's the key. Bring people into the room who have already done these sorts of things and can shorten that path to ROI. Not to be too transactional about it, but that's basically it. is like, is there a shortcut, something to get you to where you need to be that's going to be good for everybody? And I think early on when Babel, I mean, we've been around since 2018 doing this AI work. And early on, I would say there weren't too many people, too many organizations that really knew how to do this stuff. We had to do like fundamental research to really think through this stuff. Now there's no excuse. There are organizations out there that have the experience. People have been certified, ISO certified. People have done testing of AI systems. People have done internal audit. They're out there, and you just need to find people who are going to shorten that path to return on investment, and that's what you need to tell your leadership, because you're going to spend a little bit more now, but you're going to get much quicker to all those upsides that you were hoping on.
Absolutely, no question. And then, Shay, we've got about 3 minutes left, but we do have one question, maybe we can try to address in that amount of time. Um, it would be great to understand what the first 90 days should consist of when starting an AI governance program for an organization. So, Shay, completely hypothetical, let's say a mid-sized organization has recognized that it does in fact need AI governance. In your mind, what is the quick, the simple, let's get started guide over the first quarter?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It depends a little bit on lots of factors, but I'll tell you what we've done, or the way we approach it. The first thing is accountability. So somebody's got to be accountable to this. So all of an organization is, people, things that they do and the tools they use to do them. That's society, in fact. But let's say that's an organization. So I need people. I need somebody or some group of people who are responsible. Okay, we found that somebody who has some basic understanding. Second thing is visibility. Where in the organization are we using AI? So, because we're talking about AI and AI risk. So an
Yes.
inventory is going to be next in line. Let's figure out where it is. Yeah. So the third thing is risk triaging of that inventory. So go in and figure out which of these use cases are high risk for us based on our context, and which of these are sort of, nice to have, but we don't have to worry about it. So triage that. Then you pick a couple of those use cases and you will go in and do a very basic risk assessment on it. What that means is, what are the actual compliance, reputational, regulatory risks associated with these high risk impacts systems that we already have? What that's going to tell you is, oh, we have jurisdiction in the EU. This is probably going to be classified as high risk. So we have all of these other obligations. You start getting a picture of what that compliance, the context is. Now, if you've decided that you want to go to ISO 42001, like you feel like that's the right path at that point, the next thing you do is say, okay, that's going to be what we're putting in our context. That's our scope. That's clause 4, right? Now, what I do, instead of jumping into just going through all the clauses, what I do is I would put very immediate first controls in place. So this is the triage. So that's like, oh, we need an acceptable use policy because we see our people are using AI. We need to have a very high level announcement to everybody. So might be something that's the precursor to your AI policy that we're going to write up and communicate across the organization. And we want to get sort of automated risk assessments from these 3 product teams. So we're going to send them a questionnaire and we're going to get feedback, and it's going to come to a centralized place. Sorry, I'm running long, but that's going to take you about 90 days. But at the end of those 90 days, you know what your context is, you know what you need to, whether you want to do 42001 or not, you have some basic controls in place, and you know who's responsible for implementing it.
And so you mentioned something very important there, and that's expertise. But we do have a secondary question around how do we evaluate expertise for those people or companies that we choose to partner with. If you have a quick 2-second, this is what I might look for if, I would really appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners would as well.
Yeah, this is tough because there are a lot of, I think, organizations and people, individual people who claim that they're experts in AI and they're experts in AI governance, when in the fact they're just entering the field and they've put up a shingle online, and that's where they're at. There's nothing wrong with that. That was me in 2018. So I'm not speaking from a high horse or anything. But from your perspective, what you're going to look for is, have they actually done anything that is verifiable with some clients? Now, that's just basic kind of, that's not, I'm not telling you anything new here. What I would say is that you do need to make sure that they understand enough of actual AI so that they can communicate with people in your organization. And that's one thing that is a big differentiator. If you talk to people and they can't talk to your the development team, like bring on somebody who's technical onto those initial calls. And if they can't speak their language, at least at a level where they can sort of recognize what the use case is and what the risks are, then they don't have any business helping you with risk, because that's table stakes. So I'd say that's, those couple of things are the sort of key.
And in parallel to that, Stephen Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. In it, he outlines that trust is a function of character and competence, competence being a product of capabilities and results. And so, what I would say is, for any organization that you're considering partnering with, validate their capabilities, validate their results. A number of mechanisms to do that, depending on the context, but it becomes critically important. We have run over. For those that are still with us, thank you for choosing to stay. Would love to continue this dialogue. In fact, Shay, we need to set this up on a regular cadence so it doesn't feel like it's such a thing. But just to recap very quickly, so we had an opportunity today to talk about evaluating risks in your organization associated with AI governance, ways that you can generate buy-in with your leadership to ensure that your governance program is not only built, but also can be sustained over time. Ways in which we can think about putting together the right team of partners. We didn't necessarily have an opportunity to talk about customizing your AI governance policy, but for those with specific questions around this, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to follow back up with you. Shay Brown, thank you so much for making the space to join us again today. For our participants, thank you so much for investing your time. We're very grateful for you. We hope to see everyone back again next month for October's Trust Masters Monthly. Thank you all. Please hang on for just a moment, fill out our survey, and we'll see you next month.